Hello everyone, it's crime time, and today's crime is about Anni Dewani, a Swedish woman of Indian origin who was murdered while on her honeymoon in South Africa in 2010. She was married to Shrien Dewani, a British businessman. The case gained international attention due to its tragic nature and the subsequent legal proceedings involving her husband, who was accused of orchestrating her murder. Khayelitsha, a township near Cape Town, is among South Africa's poorest areas, characterized by makeshift shanties crowded together in the sandy landscape. It's not a place many outsiders visit after dark due to safety concerns. One Saturday night in November 2010, Simbonile Matokazi, a government worker, was surprised to find a distressed foreign man at his door. The man, Shrien Dewani, dressed in an expensive suit, sought help reporting a hijacking. Dewani, a businessman from Bristol, England, and his wife Anni, married for 3 weeks, were on their honeymoon in Cape Town. They had taken a private tour of the townships east of the city the previous evening, an unusual choice for tourists of their status. Their tour ended abruptly when armed men hijacked their vehicle west of Khayelitsha. After a terrifying ride, the hijackers left Shrien and Anni stranded on a sandy road, taking Anni with them. Police escorted Shrien back to his hotel and a search for Anni began. Early the next morning, Anni's lifeless body was found in an abandoned minivan in Khayelitsha Park, not far from Matokazi's house. She had been shot at close range in the neck. Forensic experts found a crucial piece of evidence at the crime scene: a thumbprint and fingerprint on the minivan's left fender. These were linked to Zolile Mengeni, a 26-year-old unemployed laborer with a prior arrest history. Although charges from a previous incident had been dropped, not far from where the minivan was abandoned. He was discovered lying in bed with others after a night of partying. Upon waking him, the police informed Mengeni of his rights and proceeded to arrest him. While searching the shack, they found a cell phone between the mattress and bed frame. When questioned about the phone's ownership, Mengeni claimed it belonged to a taxi driver. Anni was 28, a bright, outgoing, and delicately beautiful young woman. Vinod knew he had spoiled his youngest daughter but couldn't help himself. When she moved to Stockholm after graduating from college to work in marketing for the mobile phone maker Ericsson, her father bought her a new Volvo and a one-bedroom apartment in a tiny neighborhood of the city. In her mid-20s, Anni sought a husband with care, often traveling to London in search of better prospects than Stockholm offered. Introduced by her aunt, she hit it off with Shrien Dewani, drawn by his wealth and charm. Despite their differing backgrounds, they bonded over shared Gujarati roots and plans for a lavish wedding. Anni's parents approved of the match, and after a grand proposal, they eagerly anticipated their honeymoon, with Shrien keeping the destination a surprise. After a safari in Kruger National Park, Shrien and Anni arrived at Cape Town International Airport and hailed a taxi driven by Zola Tongo. Passing through the airport, they headed to the luxurious Cape Grace Hotel. Despite the allure of Cape Town's tourist spots, the reality of its violence lurked beneath the surface. Gugulethu, a township with a rich anti-apartheid history, was avoided by tourists due to its high crime rates. Ignoring this, Shrien and Anni planned to experience the city beyond the sanitized areas, opting for a dinner at Surfside Restaurant in Strand. After their meal, they strolled along the beach before returning to Tongo's van. Their plans for drinks in the waterfront district took a harrowing turn when armed men hijacked the vehicle, forcing Tongo out and taking control with the couple inside. Redirected deeper into the Cape Flats, they were eventually ordered out of the van, setting off a tragic chain of events. The harrowing ordeal began with armed hijackers separating Shrien from Anni, despite their desperate pleas. Negotiating with the hijackers to spare Anni, Shrien was forced out of the vehicle, leaving Anni alone with one of the gunmen. Meanwhile, the devastating news reached Anni's family in Sweden, prompting immediate action. Anni's father, Vinod, assured Shrien's father that they would do whatever it takes to secure Anni's release. Determined to rescue her, Vinod flew to South Africa. Arriving in Cape Town, Vinod struggled to unlock his phone to check for updates, only to hear the sound of sobbing in the background. He recounted his family's journey from Uganda in 1972, seeking refuge in Europe and eventually settling in Sweden. Vinet's home was adorned with photographs of Anni, a testament to his love for her. Upstairs in Anni's bedroom hung a large portrait of her in her wedding dress, a gift she never got to see. Neelam, Vinet's wife, avoided discussion of Anni's murder as she recovered from stomach cancer. When Vinet flew to Cape Town with Prakash Dewani, they shared a deep emotional bond, united in grief. Over the past year, despite initial concerns, Vinet had developed a close relationship with the Dewani family. Upon arriving in Cape Town, diplomats and police met Vinet and Prakash at the airport, bringing them to the hotel where Vinet finally embraced Shrien, although the atmosphere was somber. The next day, Vinet viewed Anni's body at the morgue alone, as Shrien tended to personal matters. The following day, Vinet, Prakash, and Shrien flew to Bristol with Anni's body for her funeral arrangements, while police in Cape Town initiated investigations, seeking their first suspect in Khayelitsha. The investigation into Anni Dewani's murder involved the Hawks, an elite police force in South Africa, due to its high-profile nature of the case and its potential impact on tourism. Captain Paul Hendricks led the investigation, noting inconsistencies in the events leading to Anni's death. Zolile Mngeni confessed to his involvement in the murder, implicating an accomplice known as Mawewe. Despite efforts to locate Mawewe, he remained elusive. Mngeni was interrogated at the Hawks headquarters in Belleville while the search for Mawewe continued. The discovery of Mziwamadoda Lennox Kwabi, the second suspect in Anni Dewani's murder, occurred 2 days after Zolile Mngeni's confession. Kwabi admitted his involvement in the crime and provided further details. Meanwhile, as Anni's memorial service took place in London, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Zola Robert Tongo, the Dewani's driver. Tongo appeared in court, where it was announced that he might enter a plea bargain in exchange for information. Shrien Dewani had initially defended Tongo, stating that he had cooperated with the police, but later expressed feeling betrayed. Vinet Hindocha had doubts about Shrien's account, despite others defending him. Certain actions, such as hosting a pizza party before the funeral and hiring a high-profile press agent, raised suspicions for Vinet. Additionally, Shrien's brother demanded that the Hindokas refrain from speaking to the media without consulting the press agent, which Vinet refused to do. Vinet Hindocha noticed inconsistencies in Shrien Dewani's recounting of the events to various newspapers, including conflicting details about who suggested visiting the township and how he was allegedly removed from the vehicle. This raised doubts for Vinet, who felt there were more questions than answers. Feeling frustrated with the lack of information from the South African police, he returned to Cape Town to Tongo's court appearance. On December 7th, Tongo appeared in the Western Cape High Court, where Vinet was present, clutching a picture of his daughter. The courtroom was filled with spectators and news photographers. The prosecutor, Rodney de Kock, announced that the alleged hijacking was not what it seemed. He claimed that Shrien Dewani and Tongo had collaborated to conceal the truth, implicating Shrien as the mastermind behind Anni's murder. Tongo's confession revealed a chilling plot orchestrated by Shrien Dewani to have his wife Anni murdered. Dewani allegedly approached Tongo shortly after arriving at the Cape Grace Hotel, expressing his desire to have a woman killed. They agreed on a fee of 15,000 rand for the killers, with an additional 5,000 rand for Tongo. The plan unfolded rapidly, with Tongo enlisting Monde Mblomo as a middleman and contacting Mziwamadoda Lennox Kwabi and Zolile Mngeni to carry out the murder. Tongo arranged for the Dewanis to be driven to a predetermined location in Gugulethu, where Kwabi and Mngeni were waiting. Once at the location, the Dewanis were ordered to lie down on the backseat while Mngeni positioned himself in the front and Kwabi held a gun to Tongo. Following the plan, Dewani and Tongo pretended to be victims of a hijacking, while Anni was abducted and subsequently murdered. Kwabi's account supported Tongo's confession, with the main difference being that Mngeni, not Kwabi, was identified as the shooter. Anni was shot and killed in the car, with Kwabi admitting to disposing of the bullet casing afterward. Tongo had struck a deal with the authorities to plead guilty and testify against the other participants, in exchange for a reduced sentence. As the details of the murder plot were revealed in court, shock rippled throughout the gallery. Meanwhile, a warrant was issued in Britain for Shrien Dewani's arrest on suspicion of conspiring to murder his wife. Shrien Dewani surrendered to the police in Bristol on December 7, 2010. The next day, he looked tired and shocked in court. After 2 days in jail, he was released on bail of £250,000, or around $380,000. He had to relinquish his passport, wear an electronic bracelet on his ankle, and return to his family home in Bristol. In Mariestad, Anni's family disagreed about whether Shrien was guilty. Ami Denborg spoke kindly of him to the press, but Vinod Hindocha started to believe his mother's suspicion that Shrien was involved. His feelings of betrayal got worse after a trip to Cape Town, where police showed him where Anni was murdered. He realized she had been alone and scared for 3 minutes before she died. Meanwhile, the evidence against Shrien kept adding up in Cape Town. Phone records showed he had been in contact with the taxi driver Tongo around the time of Anni's murder. Security cameras at the Cape Grace Hotel apparently caught Shrien giving Tongo money. The police also said they found no evidence that Anni had been sexually assaulted, making it seem like her murder was planned. Then, there were stories about Shrien's private life. A man said Shrien had paid him for kinky sex before he got married. Shrien denied it and said he would sue the man, but soon after, another man came forward with similar claims. He said Shrien was worried about his upcoming marriage and didn't want to go through with it. There was also troubling signs before the wedding. Anni had called her sister in tears, saying she wanted to cancel the wedding because Shrien was controlling and mean to her, but she went through with it after her family convinced her to. On November 15th, the day after Anni Dewani's body was found, reporter Dan Newling went to the Cape Grace Hotel. He found Shrien Dewani, who was with a group of people. Newling introduced himself as a journalist, but Shrien didn't want to talk. Newling said he'd be in the cafe if Shrien changed his mind. After a while, Shrien came into the cafe and talked to Newling for about 45 minutes. Shrien seemed tired and upset. He said he felt guilty about what had happened and talked about how much he loved Anni. A few days later, there was a press conference about the case. Newling asked if Cape Town was safe for tourists, but the police commissioner didn't answer directly. Instead, he talked about crime in other places. Newling thought it was strange that the commissioner didn't answer his question properly. As the case went on, Newling started to doubt the official story. He knew the South African police had a bad reputation for being violent and corrupt. He thought it was odd how quickly people believed the taxi driver's confession. Newling also wondered if it was realistic that the murder plot happened the way the police said it did. One thing that made Newling suspicious was the police saying Anni wasn't raped. If that's true, why did the attackers separate her from Shrien? Newling couldn't stop thinking about this question, so one day he decided to go for a drive. In Aletha Park, near where Anni Dewani was found, Newling talked to people to get more information. A young woman said she saw the body being taken out of the car. She described seeing blood and Anni's clothes pulled up, but she couldn't say if she was raped. Newling also got a hold of a report by a pathologist who examined Anni's body. It said there were bruises on her leg, like fingerprint marks. This suggested she might have been attacked, even though the police said there was no evidence of sexual assault. Lawyers for the accused men said their clients were tortured into confessing. They claimed the police hit and suffocated them to solve the high-profile case quickly. Meanwhile, Shrien Dewani tried to take his own life. He was suffering from severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. He was admitted to a hospital and later to a mental health facility. Newling wrote an article saying he believed Shrien was innocent. He thought the evidence against Shrien wasn't strong. The prosecution's witnesses were unreliable, and there could be other reasons for the money Shrien gave to the taxi driver. The case stirred up strong emotions in South Africa. People didn't want their country to be known for violent crimes against tourists. Although Kwabi confessed to his involvement in the crime, Mngeni went on trial in 2012. He claimed Kwabi was the one who shot Anni. Despite inconsistencies in their stories, Mngeni was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case against Shrien began to unravel. Critical text messages between him and Tongo were missing, and the hijacking appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. Tongo may have framed Shrien to reduce his own sentence, with the police possibly cooperating to shift blame onto a foreigner. In court, Shrien's attorney portrayed him as deeply affected by his wife's death and struggling with mental health issues. The extradition hearing was postponed, prolonging the uncertainty of his guilt or innocence. Reflecting on the case, the reporter found Mgeni's initial confession most plausible. However, Shrien's reluctance to travel to South Africa hindered the search for truth. Despite everything, Vinod Hindocha, Anni's father, remained focused on getting answers, not jumping to conclusions about Shrien's guilt or innocence. If you like this video, watch our previous video about the case of Grace Mullane, who was strangled in a hotel room by her Tinder date.